All of the possible ink has to go in there before proceeding to the washout booth for several reasons. One, it just becomes a giant mess.
If they do get out into the environment, they can cause harm. That's why we regulate them. That's why at Pratt we have safety practices.
When we get a call to pick up for hazard waste, we have 18 satellite stations on campus in our studios. And these studios contain a 55-gallon
policy is for no one to use a spray paint or a surface-mount adhesive in an
does something improperly. He knows that certain materials can't go down the drain and goes ahead and pours it down the drain and gets caught doing that.
The hazard while inking a plate, rolling up a stone, and or using the screen print facilities in the ink there, even though it's water-based, there are materials in the inks that can be harmful due to skin contact. So one thing you want to keep in mind is that you want to avoid hand contact with the inks. The best thing to do is just to buy a box of disposable gloves and wear those while you're using the ink. We use only water-based ink in the studio, which is great. It definitely lowers the toxicity levels greatly. Once you're ready to wash out your screen, you'll have a lot of additional ink left in there. One, you can reuse it. So you get a spatula and put back what you can use, and or there's always a disposable container. All of the possible ink has to go in there before proceeding to the washout booth for several reasons. One, it just becomes a giant mess. So the more ink you get on you, the greater the potential hazard. And two, we need the least amount of ink to go down that sink possible. A lot of the inks that are made now are a lot less toxic, and the additives as well. So the greater potential hazard is the things that you're using for cleanup. What's called a reclaimer and a haze remover. That is actually not in use in the shop anymore because it was used too much and is too great of a hazard to the students. And there's something in the shop that's a lot less harmful than haze remover called degrade. And it's basically a water miscible detergent that removes the ink residue before it really has time to set. When you're done printing or processing your plate or stone in lithography, the cleanup process involves the reusable rag system and disposal of any materials that have come in contact with solvents and or inks. So ink-soaked rag would go in the bin, and an ink-soaked piece of paper or tarlatan or cheesecloth that sometimes gets used goes in the hazardous waste bin. If there's excessive amount of ink and or solvent, the monitors are told to consult with me and or the material safety data sheet. We have a alphabetized full list of everything we have in the shop, and within those sheets it tells step by step how to contain a spill. We have at least 2 containers, disposal bins around the shop. The main thing that's really important is that they remain closed at all times. So if a rag's poking out, that's actually an EPA violation. So I tell the students that, as well as the monitors look for that, and myself. So we're constantly monitoring the levels of it. When school's really busy, they have to be emptied sometimes twice a week. The system we use is a rag recycling system. Instead of blasting through shop rags that will be disposed of, they are just put in a can, a safe can, and removed weekly to a service that will launder them and bring them back. The reason why education about hazardous materials is really important is you have to be concerned about the routes of entry. So some solvents and inks can be soaked in the skin or inhaled, or if hands are not washed properly, ingested. So there's one thing involved with that. The other is that hazardous materials, over time, the effects can build up and cause more serious chronic effects. So prevention now in education will prevent any of these effects from being a factor later on.
In the drawing and painting studios and classrooms, they use lots of different kinds of paints. Within those paints, there's a range of colors, there's a range of chemicals and minerals that get used for those pigments. Sometimes those pigments are classified by the EPA as hazardous materials, often heavy metals like cadmiums and leads. But also with oil paints, they're oil-based paint, so they can't be poured down the sink. Solvents are flammable, so those are also classified as hazardous by the EPA. Usually use solvents to dilute and mix with oil paints, so that's another consideration of something that would be hazardous in the drawing and painting studios. Managing hazardous waste from cradle to grave means managing it from the outset when it becomes waste, and then managing it all the way to its end product so that it gets separated from normal trash. So from the cradle would mean that the students know, they have an idea of what qualifies as hazardous waste, and they know where to put that waste. That's the most important thing, that it gets identified as hazardous waste and separated from waste that wouldn't be considered hazardous. So from there, it gets shipped to the appropriate facilities. It could go into a chemical treatment center where it'll be cleaned and reused. Other places is it gets incinerated and burnt. All these different places just to make sure that it doesn't end up in the environment, in soil, in groundwater, in reservoirs, in drinking water, and so on. As an art school, Pratt is expected to know how to dispose of all these materials, hazardous materials, in a legal way, complying with the EPA regulations. And it's also Pratt's responsibility to make sure the students know. And so if a student knowingly does something improperly, if he knows that certain materials can't go down the drain and goes ahead and pours it down the drain and gets caught doing that, then that student can actually be held personally liable. It can be a criminal act for that student to do it because he was told that this was a violation and went ahead and did it anyways. It's important for students to know that their actions in the studio and the waste that they produce does have an impact on the environment. So using a silica jar and keeping a lid on that jar so that the solvents don't evaporate into the air and get into the environment. The silica jars are great because they really minimize the waste. You can clean your brush again and again. It separates the sediment from the solvent, so the solvent can be reused for up to like a year even. And then when it comes time to get rid of that waste, disposing of the solid waste and the liquid waste in the hazardous waste drums. So one of the responsible ways to dispose of water-based paint waste is, one, to dispose of it when it's in its dry form, and it can be just thrown in a garbage can. We have a 3-jar system, and basically what that does is it dilutes it quite a bit, the paint to water ratio. And there's a lot more water than there is paint, so that it's a legal limit that can be poured down the drain. As far as obsolete materials, there's different ways to dispose of those. I mean, the best way is to give them to someone that's going to use them so they get reused. We have a system where we have a certain place. It's a storage cabinet that we have in the senior studios, for instance, where they can place like paint tubes that aren't done that they don't want anymore so that someone else can take something and place something. Also, if you have a canvas that you don't want, it's covered with paint, it's covered with oil paint, you can strip that canvas, reuse the stretchers, but take the actual canvas that has paint all over it and put that in a solid waste container. We also just encourage students to be considerate. Most studio areas they're not isolated, they're open, they're communal. So what you're doing in your studio, not only could that have a harmful effect on you, it could have a harmful effect on other students.
Here at Pratt Institute in the Department of Math and Science, we look at chemistry in a lot of different contexts. Some of our faculty actually look at metals as part of pigments. Metal compounds help provide color in paintings and art materials. Some of us, like me, I look at these same pigments, these same metals, as pollutants in the environment. Often in the environment, some of the chemicals that we use in paints can actually do harm in biological systems. So we do use hazardous materials at Pratt, and the reason that they are hazardous is because if they do get out into the environment, they can cause harm. That's why we regulate them. That's why at Pratt we have safety practices designed to keep them safe, to keep them from having a larger environmental impact. We have a health and safety program that makes sure that all materials are labeled. If you do encounter something that is incorrectly labeled or capped, you should again let Pratt's environmental health and safety program know so it can be capped, labeled, disposed of properly. Of the chemicals that we use on campus that might be DOT hazardous materials, we use pigments like lead or cadmium. We might use solvents, including volatile materials like benzene or acetone. We might use corrosive materials, including acids and alkaline materials like sodium hydroxide or hydrochloric acid. We use powdered substances that might be inhalation hazards. For example, raw pigments, even aerosol spray cans. Those are also a hazardous substance, and they do have to be stored properly. Where we store chemicals within the Department of Math and Science, we do have a chemical storage room, which also has cabinetry and cabinetry specific for flammables, corrosives, acids. For smaller materials that we keep on hand, we do have chemical storage cabinets in the individual classrooms and research spaces. Personal protective gear that you should wear when dealing with hazardous chemicals might include goggles, might include gloves of different type depending on the material that you're working with, might include either disposable or more resilient garments. We also recommend that you wear closed-toe shoes just in case you're dealing with a liquid substance that might spill. So if there is a spill, your first point of contact should be Pratt's Environmental Health and Safety Department. Someone will be there to advise you on what action should be taken. If you haven't been trained, if you don't know what to do about managing a small spill, again, Pratt EHS is your first point of contact. If you have been trained, if you do know what to do, there are small spill cleanup kits available to you. They should be appropriate to the task that you're working on. But again, for something larger, Pratt's EHS department will help coordinate with the fire department, with building evacuations, if they need to be brought in. Some safety features that are common to the labs at Pratt, we do have safety showers to give an instant deluge if a large spill soaks your clothing. You can pull a cord and instantly be showered with water. We also have eye wash stations where it can flood the eyes if you get powders or any type of spill that splashes into the eyes. We also have fume hoods to keep from inhaling any toxic or volatile vapors. If you're not absolutely sure whether to treat something as a hazard or not, err on the side of caution. Make sure that you call health and safety if there's any question about how to dispose of things. Don't put it down the sink. We shouldn't be putting anything that we suspect of being a hazard down the sink. Again, if you're unsure, please talk to Environmental Health and Safety.
Universal waste is a tricky waste profile because most people think anything that's electronic is universal waste. But according to EPA standards, anything that has mercury in it is considered universal waste. For departments like facility, it would be fluorescent lamps, whether it be U-shape or 8-footers or 4-footers. And departments like computing, IT, and the library, it's just the computers that have mercury switches or any equipment that pretty much has mercury in it. There's over 30 buildings on campus. We generate over probably 1,000 bulbs a month. And we try to minimize that by using a system we use with a bulb beater. And a bulb beater is pretty much a chain-linked motor that busts all the bulbs inside a 55-gallon drum with a 3-stage filters. Well, it's a good thing because it saves us a lot of space. You could put 600 to 700 bulbs in that one 55-gallon drum instead of storing 600-700 bulbs just standing up inside boxes. If it's electronic waste, we use a company called Perscolis, and what they do is they salvage parts from computer parts that we give them, and they put it together, and if they can make a full computer, they make it available to disadvantaged kids in the city. Nickel cadmium are segregated from alkaline batteries. Alkaline batteries are household batteries we use for cameras, watches, and mainly at a small amount you could throw those in the waste, but nickel cadmium are like heavy metals, so it has to be disposed of in a certain way. So when I get those, I segregate those in different containers to regular alkaline batteries. When we get a call to pick up for a hazard waste, we have 18 satellite stations on campus in our studios. And these studios contain a 55-gallon closed-lid drum that contains all our solid waste, which are usually rags, cloths, paintbrushes, and a 5-gallon liquid drum for our odorless mineral spirits. Over the course of the year, it's mainly the solid waste that I pick up. And when I get the solid waste, it's usually in bags. We take them over to our closet, and in our closet are 55-gallon drums. In accordance to the EPA, they're supposed to have an EPA waste label that has the chemical name, certain characteristics on it, and the date that it's accumulated. From that point on, we have about 90 days as a school to get rid of our waste. We seal it up, we put them on a pallet, and put them right back in our storage areas. As soon as the facility vendors come in to take the waste, they have to put their own labels on it. And under DOT standards, they have to put certain characteristics, either flammability, explosion on it, before it could get shipped off our campus site. Overall, universal waste is one of the biggest waste streams we have on campus, so it's very important we manage it in a safe and proper way. And as long as everybody on campus work together, it's going to continue to work really well.
Well, surface coating can create some hazards to the individual applying a coating. Especially on campus, students look at spray cans that you buy at the hardware store and consider them consumer products, so they don't realize the hazardous materials that are within that paint formulation. Now, when you take a spray can and you just spray free-for-all, you're breathing in some very toxic contaminants that can be really harmful to your health. So Institute policy is for no one to use a spray paint or a surface-mount adhesive without using a spray booth. There are various models of spray booths, and the smaller booths for models and like that are located in the main building on the 3rd floor, and Steuben Hall up in the ComD area. And there's another one in the basement of machinery, which is the furniture industrial design shop. The two larger booths are department owned, so you have to have express permission to use those and schedule an appointment through the shop technician. And those are located in Pratt Studios in the 5th floor wood shop, and the chemistry building wood shop on the 3rd floor in the fine arts department. Before you use any material, you should be very familiar with the hazardous ingredients that it may contain. For example, if you take a spray can that you buy at the hardware store and you read the back of it, you're going to find that it contains acetone, toluene, xylene, a lot of toxic organics that are both flammable and also very toxic. They can affect your kidneys, your liver, and your central nervous system. Make you very sick. How to get more and detailed information is by looking at the MSDS, or the Manufacturer's Material Safety Data Sheet. That will contain all of the chemical and physical properties for that hazardous substance and tell you how to use it, how to store it, how to handle it, to minimize your exposure and adverse health effects. Well, as with anything, the manufacturer's recommendations will be there. It'll tell you to wear safety glasses or goggles. Secondly is hand protection. Your skin is like a big sponge, and you put anything on it and it'll pass through the dermal layer and enter your bloodstream and then find some target organ to mess up. Well, I guess the most important thing is to understand the limits of the particular model you're using. Number one, if you have a large piece of work, don't try and cram it into a 3x3 foot booth, because the airflow will be obstructed and you won't get the proper ventilation exhaust that you're looking for. When you're going to operate or spray any piece of work, you want to make sure that, number one, the exhaust fan is on, you get proper lighting, that the interior filters are clean and functioning, and also that you position yourself so that you are not between the work and the booth. So stand at the face of the booth on the outside with your work centrally placed within the booth so you can have a good work surface area. And leave your piece in the machine with the exhaust fan on for a short time so that the paint will dry and not expose your studio to vapors or fumes. Also, make sure that any cleaning materials that you have are collected at the end of your session and put into the hazardous waste receptacles. Nothing goes in the plant trash, nothing goes in the sinks in the way of oils or solvents. So do your part to protect yourself and the environment.